Hello, and welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 38, an interview with Dr. Matthew Santa. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Hi, Matt. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Heidi?
Good. Thank you so much for giving me your time to talk about composing.
It's my pleasure.
So, through the grapevine, I heard that it's snowing in Lubbock right now.
Yes, maybe 1.5 feet or something.
Oh,
it's,
wow.
Very nice for us.
Yeah, I'm so jealous. It's wet, it's wet and gloomy here, so I'd rather have snow.
Sorry.
Oh, shoot. So how's everything at Texas Tech and Lisa and Mark?
They're great. Things at Tech are great. Just about to wrap up the semester. Just have one more final to give and grade, and I'll be done.
Yeah.
So very exciting.
Yeah, it's a busy time for students and professors.
Definitely.
Sure. So not only are you a professor at Texas Tech University, but you're a jazz pianist, an author, and a composer. So I can't wait to pick your brain about what your compositional process is like in your compositions.
Well, I love every minute of it. I can tell you that. So I love thinking about it and thinking about the strategy of composing and teaching and playing and making music. So
that's exciting. So for those who may not know you, could you give us a brief background of how you came to music, how you came to composing, your main instrument, and things like that?
Sure. Let's see. I've been playing piano since I was about 5. I didn't take lessons that whole time, but I took lessons, in elementary school and then again in high school. And in high school, I also started playing guitar. I've also been singing since I was old enough to speak, basically. So in college, I always played in the jazz ensemble, and I always sang in one of the choirs.
Okay.
So those are my primary ways into music in terms of performing.
Okay.
Composition started very early, too. I composed my first piece in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
But, I didn't compose the whole time. I mean, I composed a few pieces at that age, which were basically, just very cute little one-page things that I got a lot of encouragement with. And then I started composing again in high school when I was playing in a rock band. And I would not really write for the rock band. The rock band was really a 60s cover band, but it just got me thinking a lot about writing that kind of music. I started writing classical music about the time I decided I wanted to go to college in music composition. So that's when I really started composing kind of classically oriented music.
Okay. Neat. It's really fascinating. Most of my listeners know that I just finished my DMA with your wife, Lisa, and at Texas Tech University. But most people may not have made the connection that I took a lot of music theory courses from you. And to see and to hear this new side of Dr. Santa is really fascinating as a student. Because, just day in and day out, I saw you prepare for class and give great lectures and feedback on papers. But to hear you talking about, in elementary school, I wrote these little melodies. It's fascinating for me. How cool. So I'm sure every composition is unique, whether it's a commission or whether it's for pleasure. But what is your compositional process like?
Well, I typically start with the text if I'm writing for voice.
Okay.
But if I'm not writing for voice, I usually start with an idea about the formal layout of the whole work, and then in each movement, I a lot of times I'll start with some idea of a traditional form, and then just start writing material that would fit in that form. Sometimes it turns out that the material doesn't really work with the form, and so I'll usually abandon the form first, and stick with the material. There's one other element that I've gotten away from in recent years, but I guess in graduate school, well, no, I guess it was in college. In college, I started experimenting with the idea of having a block of meter changes. Rather than writing something in a particular meter. I would decide I'll have, 3 measures of 3/4, a measure of 6/8, 2 measures of 5/4, and a measure of this. So that there was, and then I will repeat that block, maybe a 10 measure block of meter changes. And that will kind of be the meter for this particular piece.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of a nice way to have something to write against.
Okay.
And so trying to write a thematic material that fits within that kind of rhythm.
Okay.
So I would try to make the rhythm of each measure fit naturally within the meter of that bar and kind of within that block. It's really hard to read, though.
Yeah.
so
how do you pick the block of time signatures?
That's a good question, and I haven't done it in a while, so I'm not sure if I even remember how I've chosen each time.
Okay.
I know I did one by chance.
Okay.
And then, I basically adjusted it to fit the material that I started working with. So it was kind of a little bit of one, a little bit of another. Maybe I started off with a block that was derived by chance and started to try to compose a melody for it, but then I wanted the melody to do certain things.
Okay.
And so then I would adjust the block to fit that melody. And then that was the block at that point.
Okay, that makes sense. Oh, how neat. Very cool. So since we're talking about composing and your compositional process, let's dive into one of your pieces specifically for flute, since it's a flute podcast. Can you tell the listeners about how you came to write Sonata for flute and piano?
Sure. As you know, I'm married to a very successful flutist, fantastic player.
Yes.
And so she was the inspiration for that flute sonata.
Aww.
And I wrote it kind of in the way I was describing my general process. I chose the forms for each movement, and then I wrote some content that would work well within the context of those forms. And in that one, the forms are pretty traditional. I think I have a sonata form at the beginning, a sonata rondo at the end.
Okay.
And the middle's a ternary.
Right.
It helps to finish a piece. And that's something, that's always difficult for a composer, especially young composers. But even seasoned composers, is the more you write, the harder it becomes to finish, because you have to try to relate everything you're writing now to every measure that came before it. Needs to... it's very easy for me, and I think for a lot of composers, to write ideas just kind of on their own, but then to place them in a context, can be really difficult. So the forms help a lot with that.
Neat.
I believe the Sonata for flute and piano, I used the metrical block strategy as well.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. So what was it about, if you don't mind being candid, what was it about Lisa's personality or character or, I don't know, her hobbies or something that she does that you wanted to relate in that sonata, since you said that she was the inspiration for the work?
Right. I think it's more her tastes. I kind of knew the music that she liked to listen to.
Okay.
And I'd say that's one of my strategies in general when I write for a particular instrument or a particular person. More specifically, I want to know what they like to listen to, and try to match that with the stuff I like, and find something that we'll both be happy with at the end. So I'm less concerned with maybe writing music that sounds nothing like anyone's ever heard before. I think that's almost impossible to do nowadays.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Then I am concerned with the person being excited about playing it. So I try to write music that I think would excite them just as much as it excites me.
Sure. Oh, that's exciting. Do you ever feel like, and I thought of this at Texas Tech when I was your student, but maybe it's a more appropriate time for me to ask you this now. Do you ever feel like Robert and Clara Schumann, where, Clara would perform her husband's works out on her tour, and she would premiere his compositions?
That's funny. I've never thought about that. Even when I was teaching the class that you were in, that one of the 3 texts was about Schumann's music.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, yes, of course, because we were doing that with the rhythm.
Right.
Yeah, the meter.
Harold Krebs' book.
Yes. The only reason why that came to my mind was actually the NFA's San Diego Flute Convention. And she was with the other two Texas Tech professors playing your trio for flute, saxophone, and piano. And I don't think that was the premiere of it, but it's a beautiful composition. And if for you, the listeners who have not heard it, I would strongly recommend you listening to that trio for sax, flute, and piano, as well as Matthew's other compositions, of course. But when I saw Lisa on stage playing that trio, and you were in the audience listening, I thought, oh my gosh, this is so Robert and Clara Schumann. So there you go.
No, I'm going to have to back up just a second there and tell you that was the quartet.
Oh, okay.
I got to protect David Shea. He was also in there.
I apologize. I knew
That's right.
That's right. Professor Shea was in there too. I apologize. That was 2 years ago, and it feels like a million.
Sure. Yes, you've been doing a lot since then, I know.
Yeah. So since we were talking about, your writing and how you approach works, and then you said beautifully how when you wrote the sonata for flute and piano, you were taking into consideration Lisa's musical preferences and things like that. Again, since it's a flute podcast, when you're writing for the flute specifically, what are your goals and intentions for writing for the instrument?
My main goal is to write music that people would be excited about playing and listening to. So I think a lot about what repertoire is really popular for that particular instrument among that community of instrumentalists. If I'm assuming that I also am excited about the sound of that music, then I will take the parts of what's popular about that repertoire and kind of highlight the parts that I'm just as excited about as everybody else.
Yeah.
And that, it's always going to sound like my music because I write in a kind of a very particular way, but I can kind of shape it a little bit based on what I know works for that instrumental community or that community of performers.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And just to make a connection, it's really more for me, and maybe other listeners can go back to past episodes in this series. But Daniel Dorff said a very similar response. He said, I want to write music that's exciting for that community or for that group of players, music that they want to hear. So I like making those connections and seeing similarities with all of these composers' answers. Very cool. So I know it's hard to pick, but do you have an all-time favorite composition of yours?
I really do like the flute sonata. Okay. It might be my favorite.
Oh, neat.
It might be my favorite.
Okay. Yeah, and for those who may not know, it is on Lisa Garner-Santa's most recent album. So I will put a link in the show notes for people to purchase that through iTunes. But it's a beautiful composition, 3 movements, and Lisa, of course, plays it very eloquently. And yeah, I think it's a good marriage, literally, of the two of you. You can definitely hear your character, your personality come through the composition, as well as Lisa's gorgeous tone and interpretation of it. So any advice or suggestions for the budding new composer?
Yes. Finish all the pieces that you start.
Okay.
Like I said, it's really hard for a younger composer to finish the works they start. And I think a lot of them, that's a part of a problem because maybe they don't know quite enough about musical forms. And so they don't have the large palette that a professional composer has in terms of having a sense of where the piece is going. They kind of tend to write measure for measure. So I would say force yourself to finish. And, even if the younger composer doesn't know necessarily where it's going, I think that will force them to find some larger structures that work well for them.
Cool. So is that something that you see quite, and I don't want to put anyone in the spotlight, but since you are department chair of composition and music theory at Texas Tech University, you come across a wide array of students from all different levels and backgrounds and achieving different degrees. Is there something with the composition students that you see a reoccurring, not mistakes, but reoccurring issues with their writing that could be avoided if they, I don't know, read a certain book or listened to a certain composer? I don't know. I'm just kind of ad-libbing here.
Sure, no, that's a great question. I think probably the problems that I've seen with younger composers, I see younger composers kind of grappling with at Texas Tech, is very similar to the ones I remember when I was an undergraduate myself in composition at Louisiana State University. When I was a graduate student at City University of New York, the composers there, it's just writing enough. That would be the other thing. Besides finish what you start would be write a lot.
Okay.
They don't a lot of times push themselves quite as far as they can, that maybe because they're waiting for inspiration. But just the discipline of forcing yourself to write in these blocks, even when you don't feel like it, that is an essential part of being successful as a composer. And just from talking to all of the composers on the faculties at the different institutions that I visited, the four-year colleges and research universities, that's something that they all have in common is the discipline piece.
Okay.
The discipline piece is huge.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring you on and talk with you and pick your brain, not just because as a student you were such an inspiration as a teacher, but then also you have this very unique niche outside of the other composers I'm talking to. You are, like I said, a department chair of composition and theory, and you are a full-time professor. And a lot of the composers, they're not teaching currently. And so just because you get to work with students day in and day out, you have that unique perspective to offer to the community. So...
Well, I can say it's very useful to me as a composer. I can say there are drawbacks too. I probably don't write as much as some of the composers you've talked to because I do teach so much, and I also write music theory textbooks now. And but some ideas I get directly from teaching those classes, thinking about the best way to teach a subject and looking at it with them. Sometimes students' questions will inspire me to notice something, or will cause me to notice something about a piece I've been teaching for years, something new. And that's always really exciting. I substitute taught for a colleague of mine, Michael Berry, his post-tonal music class. And I was trying to show them, the class topic was about set theory kind of relationships. And I showed them this three-note chord, not a chord built in thirds, but a more kind of modern sounding chord. And I was trying to show them how you could connect the music, use the same set class both linearly and vertically to kind of tie the space together. And I came up with a chord progression that is actually the main chord progression in the second movement of the Flute Sonata.
Oh, wow.
So that's where that came from, is that the initial four chords, I wrote that in class to illustrate a certain point. And I was like, well, this is really pretty nice. I like the sound of this. I'm going to use this.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's so cool. And just to be able to, because you're in it, like in just different angles, like you're at it, you're approaching your music as a composer, but you're approaching it too as a pianist. I'm sure you use the piano as a medium to help with your compositional process. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. And then coming at it from a teacher perspective and like working with it and drawing it up on, I'm going to sound old fashioned, on the chalkboard, like you're able to kind of examine it from different angles. Are there any last comments, something that you want to shout out to the world, something that you just need to get off your chest and tell the educator or the flutist or the composer, researcher, author, anything that's on your heart that you'd like to share?
I'd say something I come across as a teacher a lot is a fear of music theory, and maybe an attitude that if they learn too much about the music and think about it too analytically, it will kind of kill the magic for them. And I would say I just want to emphasize how untrue that is. There's this, I teach lots of the same pieces year after year when I teach my form and analysis class. And I still am moved by the recordings that I play to students, even after years of studying these same pieces. I think particularly I have Jesse Norman singing "When I Am Laid in Earth." I think I've taught that for 20 years now, that piece. And also Brahms Violin Concerto, probably taught that for 15 years.
Wow.
I use those pieces in that class every semester I teach it, which is almost every semester I teach. and there are spots in them that move me. I have an emotional response when I hear them. So the idea, I think it's really kind of an excuse to maybe not, they don't, I think subconsciously maybe a defense mechanism. I don't want to spend the time or take the energy to really figure out what's going on here analytically. So that's kind of the excuse as well. It's going to kill the magic if I do that. I think really that's a cop out, and I'd say that I'm really understanding what's going on, like those specific passages. A lot of times, I really kind of feel like I know why I have the response that I have, but it doesn't stop me from having that emotional response.
No, I like that, and it just in my own mind here and thinking, I have to credit a lot, if not everything, to Lisa for freeing me of thinking too analytically. And that's just how my nature, my personality is. And for her to, as she says, for me to get messy and color and have that magic in music, she brought that back to life for me. And then when I kind of merged the two minds together, the analytical side and the creative side, I noticed that for me, the analytical side and knowing the form is a good starting point, but I got stuck there. But when this creative side came to life, I realized that the form and knowing the theory behind it almost made sense to me. You need to know that side too, just to be able to give yourself a reason why, or like if you, for example, like dissonance, like if you know there's like a non-core tone, you have not a reason or excuse, but an actual knowing of, oh, I want to bring that out because of that beautiful tone in that chord. And then that has that magic, that energy, and I know why. Does that make sense?
Right. It does.
Yeah.
Just I think maybe you're kind of talking about with the expressive side is the being willing to kind of take chances and step outside of the theory, but you kind of know where you're going expressively more when you have the knowledge of the structure.
Yes, exactly. They kind of go hand in hand. But I do appreciate you saying like not to let it be a cop out and let it still have that magic, and that's important.
Right. Everyone should use everything that God gave them.
Yeah.
Rational and emotional responses to the music need to be combined to reach the highest level of performance.
Exactly. Yep. Because, I mean, you as a composer, you said, back at the beginning of the interview, you said, you first figure out what form you're going to use. That just shows you right there that, you need that structure to help put that magic and the fairy dust, into that structure. Or if it was just all fairy dust, then it wouldn't make sense to the listener's ears. Yeah. Cool. So in the last segment of the show, I've been doing a portion called Picks. Do you have any picks for the listeners today?
Sure. I'll talk about things that I've been thinking about lately. A lot of times I'll recycle some of my favorites. So this week I went back to one of my favorite jazz pianists, Brad Mehldau, and I was listening to his first album. It's called Introducing Brad Mehldau. It's from 1995. And I was going back through that. There's a track on there in particular, Young Werther. That's great, and it's I like these changing meters, and it's got some of that in there. And I also like to try to transcribe the music mentally as I'm listening, and I still haven't figured it out.
Oh, wow.
25 years later, I'm thinking maybe I should just email him and ask him to send me a chart for it or something. I don't know him personally, but
wow, that's impressive.
I imagine I could hunt him down.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I love it. It's got such a great drive, and the whole album is great.
Okay.
I use it sometimes in class because it starts off with a standard. It might as well be spring, and it's in 7, and it's just a good example of marrying a really traditional type of form. It's kind of a typical ABA form with and making it new by just putting it in a different metrical context. A lot of jazz performers do that now, but Brad Mehldau is one of the best.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the album I've been listening to, and I'm just starting to switch back to Christmas music, but I'll just go with that album.
Okay. No, that's great. I can't wait to check it out. Any other picks?
Sure. I'll see. I'll try to cover some different mediums. So like maybe as far as a book, I've been thinking about Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond.
Okay.
It's from 1997. Again, recycling.
Yeah.
But some of the great ideas from it just keep coming up again and again for me. So I went back and reread a little bit of it just recently. I read just a little bit of that one. But I guess I should also say I'm trying right now. I'm reading one called Organized Time by Jason Yust, who's it's Oxford University Press. It's a hardcore music theory book. So I'd say I think if you've got a degree in music, you can probably read it easily, even if you're not like a music theorist.
Okay.
But it is pretty heavily slanted towards professional music theorists.
Mm-hmm.
That just came out in 2018.
Okay. Neat. I can't wait to check those things out. So my picks for this week are also of different mediums. One is a documentary titled Man on Wire, and that came out in 2008. It's a really fascinating story about a French man who shows off his art of walking the tightrope. And his biggest masterpiece was between the two twin towers. And so it was a very fascinating story, and there were a lot of parallels, believe it or not, between his tightrope walking and other arts like music. So I recommend that documentary. And the second is an Audible book. I'm sure you could get it in real book format too, but I listened to it through Audible, called Hope in the Dark by Craig Groeschel. And he's a pastor, and he talks about if you're going through a traumatic moment in your life and how to cope with that and deal with that through scripture. And it was just very moving. I read it a year or so ago, but very well written. And those are my two picks.
You all have to check those out.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for giving us your time and your energy and talents. And thank you from one teacher to the next for everything you do for Texas Tech University and the music community. I know you work so hard writing your books, and seeing you in action and being a student of yours throughout those 3 years was very special to me, and I thank you very much.
Well, thank you just for saying so. It means a lot.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
This doesn't speak for everybody, but I don't think teachers are recognized as much as they could be.
Sure.
Yeah, well, you have a wonderful snowy day in Lubbock, and I will talk to you, Lisa and Mark, very soon.
That sounds great. Thanks. You have a great day, too.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.